Yes, it's News for Scotland. I'm Hugh Stewart. This is our podcast for the 24th of November weekending. We've got Grangemouth, how bad is it for the Scottish economy? We've got Scottish quick news stories coming up. Gaza, what is Scotland's attitude? Wealth tax, should we tax wealth instead of income? We'll look at the autumn statement. We have an interview with poet and author Jim Ferguson. And does the UK government think we're expendable? All that's coming up. It's News Where We Are. And thanks for joining us for this week's edition of News for Scotland. I'm Hugh Stewart. This week I begin with the shock news announced this Wednesday that Scotland's only oil refinery is to close. The Grangemouth refinery, owned by PetroNeos, that's PetroChina plus Ineos, faces demand changes and price competition from modern new-built refineries in Asia and the Middle East. Frank Demme of PetroNeos Refining said that adapting the Grangemouth plant is necessary due to the energy transition and the fall of demand for the types of fuel produced at Grangemouth, i.e. mainly petrol and diesel. The Grangemouth plant will not be closed completely, so a certain number of the existing 2,000 jobs will remain. A total shutdown would in fact be very expensive for PetroNeos, as that would force them to restore the land to its previous condition. Instead, from 2025 onwards, Grangemouth will be a hub for the importation of fuels. The company's other plant at Finnart in Loch Long will be converted for the import of diesel, which can be pumped to Grangemouth by existing cross-country pipelines. Detailed plans are not yet in place, although the company is looking at the chances of building a biorefinery on the site. Jim Radcliffe, who owns Ineos, is currently bidding to buy 25% of Manchester United. Mary Spoage, economist at the Fraser-Vallender Institute, said on Twitter X today, that's Thursday, that the net loss of jobs would probably be 400, but that these are high-value jobs of importance to the local economy. She disputed, however, the reported shock to the Scottish economy. It has been widely reported on Wednesday that Grangemouth represents 4% of Scotland's GDP and 8% of its manufacturing base. According to Fraser-Vallender, however, the entire chemical and petroleum industry in Scotland only represents 1.1% of the whole economy, and most of those jobs are in chemicals, not in petrol and diesel. The true value of Grangemouth is more likely to be about 0.25% of Scotland's GDP. Scotland, of course, is now a service economy, no longer based on manufacturing. Dr. Spoage agrees that the Grangemouth news is worrying, but she emphasises that we need to use accurate figures. Do you think Scotland needs a manufacturing economy, or is Scotland in the future going to be making computer games, delivering tourism and other services of that kind? Tell me what you think, and you can comment on our Facebook or on the YouTube page. Please get in touch. There's more on the economy coming up shortly. We've a short report on the UK economy and the autumn statement, and as the Conservative government prepares for the next election, and we also have a special coming up later on the economics of a wealth tax. But next, back to Scottish news. Crime figures, are they up or down in Scotland? The Chief Statistician for Scotland has revealed the latest crime numbers for the year ending this September. According to how you look at these, criminal activity is either rising or it's falling or it's just the same. Well, you know what they say about statistics. Firstly, I'll look at the just the same version. The most recent figures count 297,425 crimes up to September, which is 3% up on the previous year. However, they're also 3% lower than they were in 2019. So who says that crime is up? The Scottish Tories point to a modest upward trend over the last 9 years, and their spokesman, Russell Finlay, blames this on the failure to recruit enough police officers. He also pointed to the worrying increase in crimes of violence. Police Scotland, however, said that Scotland continues to be a safe place to live and work, with historically low levels of crime. Their statement also stressed that detection rates since Police Scotland was set up in 2013 have been extremely high, at world-leading levels. Angela Constance, Scottish Government Justice Secretary, said that all crimes are 40% down when compared to the year 2006-07. Professor John Robertson, on his Talking Up Scotland blog, took up the debate on Wednesday by showing a bar graph covering the last 20 years. That does indeed show a gentle rise in recent years, however a noticeable fall since 2007, which happens to be when the SNP took office. So are the numbers up or down? Well, it depends on which part of the graph you look at. One thing we should note now is that crime figures in England and Wales are at least twice as high as a proportion of the population. War in Gaza. On Wednesday, the Scottish Parliament held a vote on the war in Gaza, which is now entering its 7th week and which has now cost the lives of 14,000 people, 40% of those being children, according to Reuters. The Parliament voted to support the motion proposed by First Minister Humza Yousaf calling for an immediate ceasefire. And here's Pauline O'Neill, the Labour SP for Glasgow, speaking for the motion.
There can be agreement amongst political parties to unite behind an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. It is this action which will show the Palestinians that we are watching and that they are not alone, and that Scotland will be part of a wider international call. It is also a call that recognises that the best chance for the release of the Israeli hostages, that the world should equally not forget or forgive the terror attacks on Israelis on the 7th of October. I do agree with Donald Cameron in one thing, a few things actually, but only dialogue will lead to long-term peace, because violence can only breed violence. Today we've heard reports that there may well be a 5-day ceasefire, still to be confirmed. But I hope this opportunity, if it arises, will be grasped. Because we have witnessed nothing like this human catastrophe in our lives. I certainly have not. The daily, unrelenting, indiscriminate, enormous firepower, carpet bombing of hospitals, schools and people's homes, and not least the loss of life, including 5,000 children. The inhumane withdrawal of food and water and internet, and the deliberate dismantling of the Gaza healthcare system constitutes completely disproportionate action. It is a slaughter, a massacre of our entire people who were already under siege. It is a clear breach of international law. The events of the 7th of October in Israel are also events which I wholly condemn without reservation and for which there should be full accountability in the International Criminal Court. But absolutely nothing can justify this response by Israel. The deliberate targeting of civilians, of aid workers, of journalists, children still trapped, hurt under the rubble, babies denied needlessly the care they need in hospitals.
There was cross-party support for many of the points Pauline O'Neill made there, and Parliament did vote to support the motion. The First Minister has written to Sir Keir Starmer to call for his support for the two-state solution, which Israel has done little to bring about in recent years, and also urged Starmer and Prime Minister Sunak to recognise the state of Palestine. Later on in this week's edition, we have a report on a Gaza demo which took part in Glasgow last Saturday. But first of all, help for civil disputes. More Scottish news. Civil law is the legal way to resolve a dispute. It could be between two persons, between two companies, or a company and a person. If a dispute is taken to court, the loser can face very high legal bills, and legal aid is not usually available. To help the pursuer, mediation hubs were set up to deal with cases where the sums involved were up to £5,000. In some cases, these centres are run by the Citizens Advice Bureau. Now, supported by $250,000 of Scottish Government funding, these centres are to be expanded. Yvonne Brown, the Scottish Government Minister, said that free mediation would now be available in 35 Scottish courts and will widen access to justice across Scotland, both for citizens and for businesses. So far, hundreds of cases have been through the mediation system, often concerning cases like disputes over goods or services, building work, unpaid bills or employment disputes. Also in Scottish news now, no more smoking or vaping. A new campaign involving citizens about dangers from vaping has been launched by the Scottish Government. The aim of the Tobacco and Vaping Framework is to create a tobacco-free generation by 2034. Jenny Minto, Public Health Minister, said that smoking is responsible for 1 in 5 deaths in Scotland, and that's more than 8,000 deaths per year. This will include raising the age limit for buying tobacco and improving services for helping people to quit. The Scottish Government will also continue to review if any other measures are needed to limit the appeal of vapes to children. The Take Hold marketing campaign will increase awareness of the harms and risks of nicotine associated with vaping, with schools across Scotland provided with digital guidance packs and resources for posters along with radio and billboard advertising. Its key message is that vapes may quickly become harmfully addictive for children and young people, affecting their concentration, mental health and mood. The Scottish Government will continue to work with stakeholders in the industry and with the UK Government as they jointly work towards a smoke-free generation. Now let's turn to the economy. The UK Autumn Statement. On Wednesday, UK Finance Minister Jeremy Hunt outlined the new tax and business support measures which the Conservatives hope will win them votes in the next UK general election, which is expected to be within the next 12 months. Although income tax levels are set in Holyrood, not London, 2 headline proposals will affect workers and businesses here. Firstly, national insurance is being cut by 2% as part of Hunt's aim to incentivise work. Business investment is also going to be encouraged as the temporary investment scheme will be made permanent. Economists partly blame low investment as a reason for the UK's weak economic performance over many years. According to the Office for Budget Responsibility, the independent monitoring body, this move could boost business spending in new equipment by around $3 billion per year. And it will have to, because the OBR also forecasts growth of less than 1% over the next couple of years, and Britain continues to face a productivity gap when compared with other European economies. Replying to Chancellor Hunt's autumn statement, Drew Henry for the SNP rose in Parliament to point out that although measures like these may be welcome, people across the UK still face rising prices and, in fact, real tax increases. Because of inflation and rising wages, people in the UK have actually been paying more in income tax over the last couple of years as the tax allowances have not increased to match prices. Speaking for the Scottish Government, Shona Robertson, Deputy First Minister, criticised the lack of investment into public services and to vital infrastructure which an economy needs in order to grow. While welcoming the increase in the state pension and to the minimum wage, Ms Robertson pointed out that still falls short of the real living wage. She also criticised the UK government for ignoring the climate crisis and failing to provide funds to cut the UK's carbon emissions. The Scottish government and other commentators will now take time to read the whole statement and to number crunch the 110 measures proposed. The Scottish budget, which sets income tax levels and spending priorities here, will be announced on the 19th of December. Still on economics, we have an exclusive interview coming up next. What is your net wealth? If you subtract what you owe on loans or mortgages from what you actually own, I expect the answer comes to less than £1 million. If you actually have more than £1 million, please get in touch with newsforscotland.org. We could talk to you. Use Facebook or comments on the YouTube edition, and you can also email us on info@newsforscotland.org. Back to the story. Jeanette Hill for the News for Scotland team recently had a talk with Dr. Tony Lawson, who's in the middle of research into attacks not on income but on wealth. And here's Jeanette's interview.
Hello folks, today I'm going to talk to Dr. Tony Lawson, and I'm going to talk to him about the possibility of wealth tax. Dr. Tony Lawson, hello.
Hello.
Thank you very much for joining us here in the studio. And your experience is in microsimulations, is that right? Do you want to tell us what they are?
It's a computer simulation method that represents every individual or whatever entity is modelled in a population.
Great. And so you have done microsimulations on crime and on household budgets, etc. And now you're working on one to look at a wealth tax. Is that right?
Yeah, that's my current interest in wealth taxes, yeah.
And why is that? I mean, obviously I've heard about income tax and everybody goes on about Scotland having some say in its income tax policies. But why are you interested in wealth tax? And how is that different from income tax?
For one thing, the amount of inequality between wealth and income is 10 times. So wealth inequality is 10 times as much as income inequality.
Has the EU been interested in wealth tax?
The EU's proposed up to a 2% tax on wealth for people with over €1 million.
So it's not to do with how much you earn, it's to do with how much you have, is that right?
Yeah, it's total amount of capital with the debts subtracted. So net wealth is the thing.
So how would a wealth tax work?
At the end of each year, possibly people could declare the wealth taxes, or alternatively, there's new rules from 2021 where banks share information on money transfers and holdings. So it could be done automatically through the bank system.
Now, when you say there's new rules, is this in the EU?
It's worldwide agreement.
Worldwide, right, great. So I think that was what the EU proposed, wasn't it? That this had to be a worldwide thing, otherwise it wouldn't work. Is that right? Because people with money move their money about the world.
Wealth taxes can be done independently for each individual country, but it's much better if countries work together to avoid people moving their wealth, to avoid wealth taxes.
And did the STUC say something about wealth tax recently?
They did a report about a year ago, and it's been taken up by the Scottish Government, and Hams Youssef has had some interest in pursuing the idea of wealth tax based on the STUC ideas. It could earn up to £1.4 billion in Scotland, and again, the process is up to a 2% tax on people with wealth of over $1 million.
A lot of wealth, and it's only 2%. It's not exactly asking a lot, is it? Yeah, it's producing a lot of money for us to use.
They're very small percentages compared to the income tax percentages, like 40% compared to 2-3%.
And the work that you're doing, what is it leading towards? What is it looking like? What's a method that you're finding?
Most research on wealth taxes is interested in the amount of revenue it generates. Yeah. But I want to find out what it would do to the distribution of wealth in future years over the long term.
So looking towards sort of like just changing inequality. Challenging inequality.
Yeah, I'm not interested in the revenue. I'm interested in what it does to the distribution of wealth, i.e. inequality.
And how do you think it might help that? Hard question, I know.
In theory, if the wealth tax is large enough, you could guarantee that it would create a more equal society. I'm trying to find out what's the lowest percentage wealth tax that would have a positive effect on inequality. So
keeping that wealth tax low so that we get people to, comply with it, is that what you're thinking?
It's not so much about compliance, it's a justification. If it's just a few percent, like the 2, 3, 4% that's been talked about, it's hard to argue against such a low percentage rate. If it turns out to be 30-40% of wealth, then that's more difficult to justify.
Yeah, but that would bring in an awful lot of money for Scotland, wouldn't it? We'd be able to solve our health and social care crisis with that money, wouldn't we, really?
Exactly, there's no shortage of money. There's plenty of money about it. It's distributed it's all concentrated in a few places.
Yeah. So you're sort of arguing it's really more about wealth than income.
Income tax is a tax on work, which is a laudable activity. Mm-hmm. Personally, I think income tax should be decreased. That should be more than offset by the tax on wealth. There's money that doesn't necessarily do anything. It just sits about.
I mean, personally, as a income taxpayer, I really don't mind paying income tax because I'm happy with what I get for it. Free prescriptions, kids get free education at university. They get support in colleges, etc. I'm quite happy with how Scotland spends its income tax. But I would welcome a wealth tax because then we could have considerably more money to spend on our infrastructures.
Current taxes on wealth are something like capital gains, or tax on houses, property taxes, which are much lower percentage than the higher rate of income tax.
Right.
But it's poorer working people that pay those higher rates of tax. Rich people tend to pay their taxes through capital taxes, which are much lower as a percentage. And
instead of, say, cutting budgets to people with disability, as the current Westminster government is talking about, a much better option would be to look at. In fact, actually, Rishi Sunak right now is cutting taxes to the wealthy, isn't he?
It's proposed in the autumn statement upcoming soon.
Well, thanks very much for talking to us, Dr. Lawson, and I'm hoping your research continues and that you're going to produce an academic report on this work. Yes.
Thanks, Jeanette. We now know Chancellor Hunt decided not to cut inheritance tax. Coming up in a few minutes, I have an interview with Dr. Jim Ferguson, author and poet. He has a book launch to announce, and that's in Glasgow next Tuesday. So that's coming up in a few minutes. But before then, we're going to turn to Yvonne, Alexis again, who's been looking, as we did a couple of weeks ago, into the mysterious finances in Michelle Mone's household. Here's Yvonne's report.
A charity run by the husband of Tory peer Michelle Mone, Douglas Barrowman, has been shut down, and details of recent cash donations will now not be made public. The Barrowman Foundation announced it was being dissolved days after watchdogs found faults in its operations and after a 14-month inquiry, with mounting pressure to have clarity around influence exerted by the Tory peer regarding Covid PPE awards. Last year, the Charities Commission announced it was assessing concerns raised about the Barrowman Foundation, which had been listed as a patron of the Kent Prince's Trust. This listing has now been deleted. The regulator did not say the nature of the concerns, but The Guardian reported at the time that the Barrowman Foundation had been funded by unsecured loans. A spokesman for the Prince's Trust said at the time, "We have not received any funds from Mr Barrowman since February 2019 and have no plans to accept any further donations." It is no longer listed as a patron on the Prince's Trust's website, now known as the King's Trust. Barrowman's Foundation's accounts for 2021 show that a £1.46 million loan to the charity was converted into a donation that year. It stated that the charity's principal funding source was donations from Barrowman and listed Mone as a trustee. This week, the Commission published a notice of dissolution for the Barrowman Foundation, dated 8th November on its website, indicating its intention to close the charity in 3 months' time. Representations must be made to the Commission within 3 months. A Charity Commission spokesperson said, "We provided the trustees of the Barrowman Foundation with advice and guidance at the conclusion of our compliance case. We have now received notification of the trustees' intention to dissolve the charity and are currently engaging with them to ensure that this is completed in line with their duties." Barrowman and Mone are not listed as trustees of the Barrowman Foundation on the Commission's website. Boyrie Cool was appointed as a trustee in June and is a former director of PPE Medro, which is being investigated after being awarded over $200 million in government contracts to supply face masks and sterile surgical gowns during the COVID-19 pandemic. This week, a spokesperson for Barrowman and Mone was reported in The Guardian as confirming that the Conservative peer was involved in the contracts being awarded. Rebecca Duke, an employee of the Barrowman Foundation Trust, was also appointed as a Barrowman Foundation trustee this year. Arthur Lancaster, another director of the Knox House Trust, has been a trustee of the Barrowman Foundation since 2017. Scottish Lib Dem Justice spokesman Liam MacArthur said, "With probes into the distribution of huge government COVID contracts still ongoing, it's important that all information about the complex web of financial arrangements that links the Barrowman Foundation, its founders and their business is preserved until it's clear that it's no longer needed." One step that could boost transparency is for the Barrowman Foundation's most recent accounts and the regulatory findings of the Charity Commission to be made public. Currently, Baroness Mone and her husband are under investigation with regard to their personal involvement with PPE MedPro, an involvement they now confirm was true after months of denial. We will watch this story with interest and keep you informed of any changes and updates.
Thanks, Yvonne. I'm sure we're going to be hearing more of that story. That's going to run. 2 more pieces for you this week. We're going to finish in a few minutes with Dr. Joe Murray, who's been listening to the UK Covid Enquiry, and alarmed to find that some of us are regarded as expendable by the Conservative government. So that's coming up in a few minutes. But before that, I spoke to Jim Ferguson, author and poet, and Jim will tell you a bit about himself and a bit about the book launch, which he's doing next week in Glasgow. That's going to be on Tuesday. Well, here's Jim to tell you all about it. Jim Ferguson, who's a Glasgow poet. Now, Jim has a volume coming out soon and a release for that special evening next week. So we'll talk about that in a couple of minutes, Jim. But first of all, good morning or good evening whenever you're listening to the show. Hello, Jim. Thanks
hello,
for joining
Stewart.
us.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me. Really lovely.
We haven't met for a while. You used to run some literary evenings out at the East End, and myself and Jeanette Hill, who's also in the News for Scotland team, used to attend that. That, of course, all stopped with COVID. So I guess you're busy again. You're doing more performance events in Glasgow now.
I mean, it's roughly the same group of people. For about the last year and a half now, we've been doing the last Tuesday of each month at the Scotia Bar in Stockwell Street. It's quite a free and easy kind of night, but we have a good mixture of music and poetry. I usually try to MC it and introduce various acts and all that. And we take people on, people just come in for the street and we want to do a poem while they're passing and so forth. So it can be quite raucous and so forth, but it's really enjoyable. And there's myself, Derek Brown, Carol Yamnayad, Brian McFall, Trevor Lakey, Ewan Hare, and Louise Malone. There's about 6 or 7 years that all sort of taken to take the day we running it, and we called ourselves the Glasgow Literary Lounge. And as you said earlier, we started off at the Carlton Bar in the East End, but that sort of came to a natural end with COVID and when our great leader Ruby McCann died. which was really, really sad, to be honest. But anyway, after Ruby died and the COVID thing happened, we decided that we wouldn't do the rights in the Carlton Bar anymore, and we'd just find a new venue to do them in. So we ended up at this Bing Bong. So we ended up at the Scotia Bar, and that's where, as I say, that's where we've been for about the last year and a half.
Yeah, you're a busy guy. Everyone's trying to talk to you this morning.
You always hope that nobody will phone you while you're being recorded, but people invariably do. So that was that. I mean, as to myself, I kind of started off doing poetry in the 1980s. I went to the Paisley Writers Group, which at that time was run by Tom Leonard, and I met Graham Fulton there, and Bobby Christie, Margaret Fulton Cook, Christine McCammond, quite a lot. It was for a writers group. It was very, very poet heavy. There weren't very many short story writers or novelists or anything. Although Jeff Torrington used to come along now and again. So that was all well and good and everything. And that was where I sort of started in the mid '80s in Paisley. Later on, I went to Glasgow Uni and did their creative writing masters course. It wasn't. I mean, it was quite a nice thing, Glasgow Uni. It was quite interesting. A good place to meet poets for other countries and writers for other countries if you're interested in meeting. Broadening your social horizons. But and I enjoyed that as well. And strangely enough, when I was doing it, Alistair Gray was one of my kind of supervisors there. So that was really great fun because Alistair was such an interesting character and bubbly and enjoyable and everything. So I had really quite a good time at Glasgow Uni. And after I did the Masters, I went on to do a PhD, which was a study of the life and work of the Paisley poet and lyricist Robert Tannahill. Tannahill was born in 1774 and died in 1810, so he had quite a short life. He was a bit in his 33rd or 34th year when he died. Committed suicide, unfortunately, but he was prone to depression.
I was just saying before we started the recording ages ago, so I used to live in England actually, and from afar I thought to myself, I'd like to find out a bit more about Tannahill, because I went to school in Paisley, and school teachers used to say, we used to have this Weaver poet, but we never really got any of his poetry. And it seems that he disappeared, actually. I'd read, when I got this wee book out of the Paisley Library donkeys years ago, that up until the Second World War, there was quite a lot of interest in Tannahill. In fact, choirs used to meet up the Glenaffer Braes, but that all stopped at World War II and it hasn't been revived again. So I think in my generation, people used to say, there was Tannahill, he's a poet, he's got his statue outside the Town Hall, but nobody ever actually knows his verses. So also he's a Weaver poet. There's just a tradition in the West of Scotland. There's people thinking poetry's for us.
Well, there are a lot of Weavers seem to, they had a high level of literacy for some reason. It seemed to be a thing with Weavers that they were very interested in education and so forth. Kind of, like that's going right back to the late 1700s, say around about the 1790s or the 1780s and so forth. But you've got the American War of Independence or American Revolution and the French Revolution. And they were huge political events that had a big influence in the Scottish weaving community. And it's, that's how they tend to have they're seen as kind of political radicals and all that, but they really took their radicalism from, the American War of Independence and the French Revolution and were kind of support. So they would tend to be Republicans rather than monarchists. And immediately, as soon as you get into that stage, you're oppositional to the kind of mainstream of what we would call British society. Even now to this day, as soon as you take a kind of Republican stance, you're set in opposition to the mainstream culture. So you end up having to educate yourself to argue your position. And so the Weavers, the Paisley Weavers were like that. And there was strangely enough, a similar group of Weavers in Northern Ireland and Antrim and Down who were very, very radical. And there was quite a lot of cross-fertilisation between the Northern Irish Weavers and the West of Scotland Weavers.
No, I wasn't aware of that. Funnily enough, I came across something to do with Paisley a couple of weeks ago. I went to a meeting where Mary McCabe, the writer, was talking about the 1820s and that period of that radical period, not only in Scotland but also in Northern England. But she was quoting government people's, on the one hand, they wanted to get people into the army to fight Napoleon, but on the other hand, Tory ministers were saying, be very careful about arming people in Paisley, because you don't know who they're going to use the arms against.
Well, I mean, even in Tannahill's lifetime, they had they'd get troops in from Glasgow to kind of quell the Paisley Weavers. This is around about 1808 and so forth, because they had a strike for over wages and so forth. But it's an interest. There was these guys, they called them corks. See, you know, like a cork, like you put in the top of a bottle. They were like middlemen. They were like, because it was a cottage industry at that time. It was before the mills, and people actually worked in their homes. They had a loom, you know, a room with maybe 2 or 3 looms in it, and people actually worked in their homes back then. And these guys would come round once a week and collect the cloth that you had made, and they paid you. You know, they were supposed to weigh however much cloth you had, and you know, you get paid by the weight. But if you were a lace maker, lace doesn't weigh anywhere near as much, if you know what I mean. So if you were making lace things, they would try and sort of, you know, basically the merchants, the corks would try and undercut, you know, that. And that's where they have the thing. Anyway, that was a whole wage dispute, and it became a kind of a small riot in Paisley in the early 1800s. That's before the kind of radicalism of the 1820s and so forth. You know, that's actually, and it was actually during the Napoleonic Wars when, you know, the oppression was even stronger. You know, if you really disagreed with the kind of British line, then, you know, they were sending the army in. And in a lot of ways, that's why a lot of poets had to be very circumspect in their use of language. And, you know, because you could get deported for treason, you know, you could get sent to Australia or whatever, or these kind of things, or you could get the jail, you know, like Alexander Wilson, who's another Paisley poet. His statue is right beside Tannahill's. He had been in the jail for about a month, I think, Wilson, and they let him out to go to trial and all that, but he absconded to America and went away in a boat rather than face. And this was because he wrote a poem about a mill owner called William Sharp, a satire on the. Anyway, he compared it with a big jobby. Okay. Getting the jail for writing a poem about somebody in which you compare it to a big job is.
Imagine that. Imagine living in a time when a metaphor gets you jailed. Right, well, let's just move on quickly to what's happening next Tuesday. Have you a new book out just now? Is that what you're launching?
I've got a kind of collection. This Tuesday coming, I'm going to have a small book launch for a sequence of poems called Double Vision, Double Voice. All of these, which actually you can hear them all on YouTube, actually, but with music. But anyway, I'm going to have a launch for that, and we're having a wee tribute to the Portuguese poet Fernando Pessoa. If anybody's ever heard of him, he won the Nobel Prize. I think he's the only Portuguese Nobel Prize for literature winner. And a wee tribute to him. And then we have an open mic, and the open mic consists of music and poets. So it's just a kind of jamboree of music and poetry. We book launch and a wee tribute to Fernando Pessoa, the Portuguese poet. That's what we're going to be having there. So that would be this Tuesday, which is the 28th of November, starting at around about 7 o'clock, and we're usually there right up till midnight.
Well, that's fine. So if people haven't been to that, the Scotia's a lively venue, as you said. In fact, it's one of the ancient pubs in Glasgow, so it's an ideal place for radical poetry. And okay, that's great, Jim. Well, I'll just call a halt there. I'm sure you've got much to do today, and I've got to go and put together the rest of this programme. So it's good to see you, Jim, and thanks for talking to me.
Absolute pleasure to be here, and sorry about my phone ringing during the thing. Okay.
That's okay. You can go and deal with your messages. Right, Jim. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Okay, thanks. That was Jim Ferguson, author and poet. Our final story this week. Joe Murray has been alarmed at the kind of information we've heard from a UK Covid Enquiry concerning how prepared and how professional the UK government was. He was particularly concerned this week when he heard that both the previous Prime Minister and the current one seemed to regard people of a certain age as expendable. Here's Joe Murray's report.
Hi, I'm Joe Murray, and the COVID-19 inquiry rolls on. Apparently, we've all had a good innings. So, if we're hit by another deadly pandemic, or a world war just happens on their Westminster watch, it's good to hear what they really think of us. In case you're a listener of BBC Radio Scotland and might have missed this, and any other good news about Scotland that's obscured in the media feeding frenzy on missing evidence of WhatsApp files, Patrick Vallance, the UK Government's Chief Scientific Advisor during lockdown, gave evidence to the UK COVID-19 inquiry on Monday, and he praised Scotland's health data as brilliant. This came after he was asked about comments he made about the health data from Scotland, which claims to have tracked the pandemic in Scotland in near real time. The Scottish health data set of 5.4 million people registered with a GP in Scotland was used to track both the progress of the virus and the effectiveness of vaccines. Vallance said the studies had been very useful and provided rapid information, describing Scottish health data as brilliant. He said the EVE studies were run by Aziz Sheikh from Scotland, and it was a very effective way of looking at electronic databases and health records held in Scotland to give early signals on things, so we get information from there. Everything from rates in Scotland, early indications of changes, through to very important data on the vaccine efficacy, which led to multiple publications in top-tier international journals and was a continued source of helpful information. Vallance added, I think Scotland has done a brilliant job over the years of getting and linking both primary and secondary care health records. It's a piece of work that was done a long time ago, and it really came into its own to be able to provide very useful information. His evidence also shone a light on the chaotic nature of decision-making in Downing Street during the pandemic, as has been the case in other sessions of the inquiry. One of his diary entries highlights how the former Prime Minister wanted to let the virus spread, while his most senior advisor Dominic Cummings suggested Sunak, then Chancellor, also thought it was okay to let people die. Not persuaded by his senior advisors, the PM says, the population just has to behave, doesn't it? The diary extract also says, PM meeting. PM begins to argue for letting it all rip, saying, yes, there will be casualties, but so be it. They've had a good innings. They just love and respect us, do they not? For the first time in my life, I'm beginning to understand those 18th century Parisians. Time for cake. This is Joe Murray handing you back to Hugh. Thank you for listening.
And Joe Murray wrapped up this week's edition of News for Scotland. So like Joe, I thank you for listening. Do you want to tell us what you think about the shows? Are there some topics we should be bringing in? Where do you listen? Do you get these shows all at one go? Do you listen in segments? We'd like to hear from you. Use Facebook or YouTube to get in touch, or info@newsforscotland.org. I'm Hugh Stewart, and I'll be back next week. Thanks.